everybody, to another broadcast of AML Gray Matters. My name is Kimberly Smith, and today we are going to be talking about the benefits of developing a training program. Now, for most of you, you're here to learn about how to do AML compliance training, um, and that's great. However, our topic can be wider than that. So whether you are the person who is responsible for all training, putting together a full training program or just the AML training program, I think you're going to learn some great tips and tricks from Justin. Justin is with FS Vector, and he's about as passionate as I am when it comes to AML training. And what FS Vector does is they have a training platform. It's called Headmaster. It is e-learning, so we're not here to kind of promote one or the other, though, because e-learning is great. You agree, Justin? But then it
I
can also
agree.
be balanced with some customized and in-person training as well. And Justin focuses on fintechs, money service businesses, and smaller banks. So welcome, Justin. This is your very first time with us, but we've had a few conversations, and it's been fantastic as we kind of came up with the idea and what we were going to discuss and things like that. So I do hope you all find some great value in today's session. Now, a little bit of housekeeping before we begin. Again, this is kind of informational purposes. It's not legal advice, and it does last approximately 1 hour. So there will be a certificate attendance for those who like your certificates. And that is only for those of you who are joining us live, because this is recorded. And yeah, so you will get that about an hour after the broadcast ends. We do have some questions at the end. You can use the question box, and go ahead, and even if you have a comment, go ahead and post your comment in that question box. Unfortunately, the chat does not work. Unfortunately, there's no handouts today, sorry, and there are 2 polling questions. And so we'll go ahead and get started and get us on our day. So again, we welcome Justin Muscolino. You're in New Jersey or New York, Justin?
I am in New York.
In New York, okay, and
Mm,
fantastic. And we have a lot of people. Most of our audience members are in the Caribbean, so but I think you kind of very much aware of that one. But from all over the world. Now, to get us started, one thing we wanted to ask everybody is, how would you rate your current company culture or your compliance culture? Now, I think this is difficult to do at times, and sometimes you don't even think about it, um, especially when you're a small organization. So it could be that you've got some ways to kind of measure culture in larger organizations. But small organizations are much harder. But go ahead and just, if you don't mind, give us what you kind of feel that your culture is like. And Justin, do you have any words about company culture or compliance culture in your experience?
yeah, it really differs, like as you mentioned, on the size of the firm, right? How long they've been around and other facets. When you look at like established firms, it's kind of hit and miss, and you see it in the not just it's the attitude, the motivation of staff, and how they perform their functions. So when you have a poor one, it could open up risk and other negative implications. So, you know, having a good compliance culture really resonates throughout the firm. And I feel like that's a big part of what I've done in my career as far as training, trying to enhance it, make people more aware and understanding about, how their day to day could be better off.
Right. And what about, like we had mentioned at one point, kind of we brainstormed about like the company's mission statement or their values, the company's values. And it's kind of my belief that whenever we're doing any kind of training or we're assessing our culture, you're asking yourself, do my staff have those same values as I do? And would you agree, or do you have any kind of experience with that?
Like the firms I've been at, like I've had really good compliance cultures and not so good. And it's about getting your staff on board and making sure that they understand the implications if things aren't running right, especially with a training program. But that buy-in is key, not just from management, but from everybody else. I think we all know, like, if you lose credibility with compliance training, it's very hard to get back.
Yeah, yeah. Tom, is the poll being issued?
Yeah.
Has that been launched? Sorry, I'm just
Yeah,
not seeing.
finished and
Okay,
launched.
finished and launched. Sorry, I did not see the kind of results. How many people kind of were saying it was good or great?
So we had quite a lot of
Yeah.
people answer. We've got 63% good, which is great,
Okay,
and 22% great. So overwhelmingly, it's pretty good at the moment, and just 1% deplorable,
okay.
and
Well, hopefully
14
we can help that one.
14% meh. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
hopefully we can help that 1% there. So fantastic. Well, thank you very much for that. Okay, so quick agenda. We're just gonna go. It's funny because Justin and I both mentioned this. End of the year, we both get a whole bunch of emails saying, "Do you do compliance training?" Because people are trying to get that year-end regulatory, obligation of AML awareness training in. So so we see it at the end of the year, which means a lot of people are kind of what we think, kind of like, oh, I've got to do this. Let's tick the box. Let's get
Mhm.
some e-learning programs out, or let's hire somebody quickly to get it out there. Um, we both do feel strongly, however, that a formalized, comprehensive training program. Again, not just the AML side, but your, onboarding of new staff. How you're going to do their training, how you're going to do refresher training, how you're going to do systems training when systems change. Um, if you have a formalized, comprehensive training program, then that is what is going to really impact that bottom line of your company, we think, or lack thereof. If you don't have a formalized one, you just kind of just throwing the training out as it's needed, kind of thing. So taking some time and really assessing your training needs, assessing what you're going to measure to make sure that that training is effective. These are some of the things that Justin's going to be sharing with us today. Justin, any comments on this agenda here that you have for us?
Yeah, like rolling out training, throwing things against a wall and hopefully they stick. It's an approach, but having a measured approach on how you go about building your training plan for any given year, we're going to talk about that, and it doesn't require much time. It's just, like having a little passion for, reducing the risk in the atmosphere, making employees happy, and spreading those positive vibes of an increased compliance culture. So it's just really following certain steps and having a game plan that
Right.
you satisfy. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I was gonna say, and that's what we're kind of here today is
Yep.
how to follow some steps to follow. Like I had mentioned before, when we first met, that I was kind of put into the compliance role. I'm not a teacher. I'm not an educator. I don't know how to do course management or anything like that. And
Mhm.
yet there I was having to suddenly give training, to 50 people in a room, once a year. And I was not a public speaker either. So it's very terrifying when suddenly this responsibility is thrust on you and it is not your skill set that you've had. So let's go beyond that last minute throw it against the wall and see if it sticks, tick the box approach. And I'm going to let you kind of kick off with some of these points that you wanted to raise and tell us about.
Thank you very much, Cam. There's always an opportunity to enhance our compliance training program from where it is. There could be gaps and opportunities to do things that are either more inclusive or more in depth. But when you're designing a program, we all know in the back of our minds what the regulatory requirements are. We have to do X this year and X next year. Now, I take a different approach. I evaluate all the risks within the organization and I create a plan based on those risks and rolling out training that makes sense for the company as a whole or individual departments and teams. And if you lay out your risks, you're going to satisfy the regulatory requirements. We all have AML needs. We have fraud needs. These are topics that resurface every year. So when you create the plan, you have a measured approach. You're most likely, I'm not going to say 99% of the time, you're going to meet the requirements based on what you produce. Now, about controlling risk. Now, we all deal with elevated elements of, heightened risk from time to time. Now, can the training program solve all those? I want to say yes, but it could definitely assist. So if you know the risks, either from, we'll talk about the different documents you can look at, risk assessment, audit, and whatnot, you're looking at those risk areas that need attention, and that needs to be included in your program. Um, and the thing about like educating people, you know, there are many firms who do the tick the box, get the requirements out of the way, but if you train people effectively, you're going to reduce the risk and increase the compliance culture. And they're going to know what to do, either in their current roles and responsibilities, or even if it has to be amended in some capacity because of regulations. Now, the next one, training doesn't have to be all permanent staff that are already on board. There's other elements of risk in personnel. You have contractors, consultants who typically do the same job as a permanent staff member. So we have to keep that in the back of our minds. Granted, yes, they're paid by the hour and we have to suck that up if they're taking training. But, think of the element of risk if we don't teach them. It's something that you don't need and you can be inclusive on your plan. Now, with new hires, this is a way to really set the new tone of compliance if you want to set one. If you're having new hire trainings on a weekly or monthly basis, you could shape the new minds of the firm in addition to, tweaking the culture of the firm itself. So there's a lot of ways to do it, but you have to set the foundation with new hires and get them to buy in and teach them what risks does a firm encounter and how we handle it, things like that. So listen, doing the tick the box, it works. You could do it, but going a little bit above and beyond doesn't require that much more time and attention.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, you had mentioned, for instance, I found this last night actually, and it
Yeah.
was this is actually from Guernsey, a Guernsey report, where they had done a survey. I think it was like 60 to 100 firms. I can't remember how many firms were surveyed. And of them, I think they said, oh, how many, a lot of the firms, yeah, three-quarters of the firms surveyed had said fraud was one of their top three financial crime risks, but yet only
Mm.
six covered it in their training to staff. And that to me was like, that's a perfect example of how we need to just, kind of look at what is our national risk assessment saying? What is
Yeah.
our business risk assessment saying are the risks? And does it thread? You almost have to tie it all together into your training. And that is I think if we spent a little bit of time kind of planning our training, we can kind of cover these things, and our training won't be deemed inadequate. Um, the other thing I was kind of thinking is, how do you formalize that training program? And I came up and I saw this kind of
Yeah.
matrix, and I thought, oh, that's fantastic. Again, I learned this yesterday, guys. So this is one of those things that it takes some time to kind of think about. But I thought, okay, yeah, you can formalize it by saying this is our onboarding. This is who we're going to do for new entrants means people new to your industry, maybe people out of college kind of thing. And then of course, then you kind of look at all your different roles and staff, and whether it's by business unit or full organization or things like that. And of course, that means you're going to have to kind of talk to all these heads of business units if you are with a bigger firm. And the one thing I always say too is don't forget that very specific IT systems training. Um,
Mm.
Now we sell a technology here at Silo, and it's interesting because we've got licensees have been using it 5, 6, 7 years, and we might not hear from them for a year, and then follow up. Turns out they've got a new compliance officer maybe, and then I go in and train that new person on the system, and it's quite interesting to see how people start to stray in systems. um, so they get the training at one point, 6 months, a year later, you go back and you kind of see how they're doing. And you, oh, wait a second, no, you weren't doing that part right. So you do have to kind of stay on top of that. Um, and then the other thing that I was kind of thinking too is in terms like, okay, who's going to be responsible for that training? What format? Is it going to be pre-recorded? And again, this is where some of the e-learning systems are fantastic. If you need specific training there. Uh, get your budget, how many people, what platforms, what vendors are you going to use, and this is how you go and get your plan to the board. Is kind of how I when they see something like this, then they can go, okay, now I know why you're asking for 20 grand for training to make sure training's done. Um, and this one too, I also really liked because it talks about like employee retention. Employees do want to see that you are going to invest in them so that they are constantly learning and improving their skills as well. So it even looks at things like, what kind of diplomas can we offer them, or participate? What kind of I guess I should say participate. Like I was even the firm that I used to work with. I think at the time they gave us certain staff like $2,000. So if I had a $5,000 program I wanted to go to, they would pay a certain percentage of it, kind of thing. So those are programs, trading programs that can be put in place. So yeah, so that's just something that I kind of put up with. Anyway, so yeah, and the
And
bottom line impact of all this, it's
yeah,
fantastic.
and yeah, it is. And actually, just going back one slide, one of the things that I always do on a training plan when it's in draft form, it's always one column always dedicated to the root cause. You
Hmm.
know, put this topic on here, and this is why. Because everything should be directed back to a risk being covered, audit, risk assessment, all that. It should all be rooted back so you know exactly what you're covering and who you're training.
Yeah, absolutely. And is it a regulatory obligation um, versus a kind of just employee retention you know benefit, so to speak?
It's not a regulatory requirement. I mean, listen, if regulators come in, they'll ask for your training materials and they might ask you a couple of questions about it. But this is more for your purposes
Hmm.
because you want to make sure you address everything. So if you come out of like 15 high risk from a risk assessment, does that equate and what does that look like on your plan itself?
Hmm.
So it's just a way to capture, every element of risk that's in your atmosphere now or this year.
Yeah. So this is where you would include, okay, new trends, new money laundering trends, fraud risk, things like that. Yeah. So you just kind of just
Absolutely.
keep breaking it down, breaking it down. Yeah. Fantastic. Yeah. And of course, like I said, as we've discussed, and I see it too, whenever
Mm.
you do, yeah, have that. What are there any other kind of bottom line impacts that you've seen?
I always attribute it to getting buy-in. If you can sell a compliance training program, you definitely have powers of influence and persuasion. Trust me, I've worked on it for decades. It's not the easiest thing to sell, but if you show how people could sleep well at night by making sure that you're, taking care of these risks and they're incorporating your plan, it just helps the matter so much more.
So it's not just the financial benefit, it's the kind of peace of mind. Your staff know what they're
Yeah.
doing because they've been trained. Yeah, that's good. Didn't even think about that one. And you talk a lot about being able to measure the effectiveness. I would find that very hard to do.
Mhm.
Can you explain a little bit more about how you go about measuring the effectiveness of training?
Yeah, absolutely. After conclusion, I evaluate every part of it because I want to know what worked, what didn't work, and what we could improve upon next time. If I see an opportunity where employees are understand the material, but they're just not applying it, you might want to work in refresher training or, additional follow-ups with communications. And that's what measuring the effectiveness can really have on your program and then on the firm itself. Yeah, believe it or not, I am certified for performance measurement from the Kirkpatrick Institute, where I learned and kind of modified their approach. You know, Behavior is one. I've always heard, and Kim, we talked about this, that behavior is tough to identify as an effective measurement. But the thing is, like, we all have tools to look at and evaluate exception reporting, the same errors being created, the same frequency. What's management's view on, the attitude change pre-training, post-training? Is it taken to effect? These are just a couple of ways to look at the behavior and whether it's applying and taking, and whether you need to do a couple of next steps in addition to that training you provided. I've been in a lot of firms on the second one as far as learning, and these are, I'm sorry, the learning with the assessments. I always feel that everybody's knowledge should be tested because if people don't understand or aren't paying attention, are they really, like, taking care of all the risks in your atmosphere? So the way I look at it is, did they understand it, and do they know what to do with it? So that's why I think assessments have a really good place. And then the reaction, now, these are just typical happy sheets we pass out, asking the crowd what they thought, what we could do different. And this is not so much on the content, but it's also on the presentation. Is the person covering everything they should? Are they getting into depth? Are they using examples to kind of accentuate their points? And what about the materials? Do they look good? Are they visually appealing? Do people understand it? And could they take it away from them? So with each part of the three, you can get something. You could have takeaways, but it's not like you have to apply all three to every single training. Use your gauge and see what makes sense.
Okay. And then the needs analysis. How do you go about assessing the needs?
This is it sounds, when I go through it, it sounds like a long process, but it really isn't. It's pretty straightforward. And this process I've used for a few decades in corporate. The first point is really understand where you are as a firm. What are the messages coming from up top? Because you want to align that with your program in some capacity. Does management feel that the compliance culture does need some enhancement or improvement? Those are elements you could take away and factor in. But it's also about, are you issuing any new products, new services? Did you expand to different geographic locations? Because then you have to look at additional risks. So that's a great starting point to get that information. But when you collect the data, now you really are looking at the firm and its individual parts. We look at the risk assessment. I mean, that's our Bible. It really does talk, if it's done right, it really does talk about each element of risk that you should consider in your program. The audit report, rules, regulations, all of this. This should be accumulated so you have a really good sense on how you want to develop your plan and all the data that's going to come together to kind of get it dictated and approved. So this also, one more point on this. So it also about conversations about with compliance officers, get their view. Because if the compliance officers are business aligned, they should know the business and the people very well. And it's also a great way to kind of expand or enhance your compliance culture as well, which we'll talk about later. But also business heads, team leads. You might have four departments, hypothetically. Meet with the business heads. They're not, I'll be totally frank, they're not big fans of compliance training because it gets involved with revenue producing activities. But you can come to a common denominator and kind of make both sides happy. And getting their buy in and their thoughts about what keeps them up at night, that is really key. And then, once you collect the data, you're analyzing it. Pretty straightforward. Like I said, for in your training plan, there should be a line item for each particular topic and the associated risk or the root cause of where it happened. And as you line it up, you'll see commonalities. For example, there are two departments that need the exact same training. Can you bring them together and do it together? There might be one training that's applicable to the front and back office. Maybe you bring them together and enhance communication flow. Maybe the work environment becomes a little better for those two groups because they understand each other and what they do. So that's what you look at the plan in the draft form to kind of find those consistencies that you could be more efficient with. And then the last part is just discussing your findings with your stakeholders, whether it's a CCO, the board, a working group. You need to have that backup in case questions are asked on a particular topic and why certain topics are not focused or not included. You should have a rationale for each one. So when I talk about a root cause for training, I'm also putting commentary in that line why we're including it, not just, something I can refer back to. But if you follow these four steps and you look at the data, the risks, you could put together a really solid training program and also meet regulatory requirements in your jurisdiction.
Fantastic. Yeah, so this slide here, we were just kind of talking about, again, kind of list out that risk assessment, internal
Mhm.
audits, regulatory examinations. We don't have to spend much time here. What was done last in compliance training. I did actually kind of add things like, look at your industry associations as well, what they're kind of saying, what your regulators saying, what kind of, training, workshops, programs, new regs, things like that. That's always part of that data collection aspect there. And I love this slide
Actually,
because,
Kim, one second, just I want to go back just for one.
okay.
Most regulators issue priorities or exam priorities for the
Mhm.
year on certain topics. I always look at that and see what's pertinent to my firm. Because you're not just looking at the internal stuff, and as Kim mentioned, associations, trends, and whatnot. You should be looking at the guidelines or information that your regulator is disseminating, especially if you're up for an exam relatively soon. That will feed into your training program one way or the other.
Okay. Yeah, that's a very good point there. Very good. Yeah, and this is kind of like what you present to the board or senior management is kind of like, okay, we found this issue. This is the topic we'll cover. Kind
Yeah,
of explain this slide to us.
so maybe I'm a little old school here, but I still use spreadsheets and I'm proud of it. So, like I mentioned earlier, every line item is a new training. It's a new root cause of why it's being developed. So when I speak to the board, they're going to ask questions based maybe on their particular area or the firm as a whole, depending on where they're coming from. And we usually get in the weeds on certain topics, and other topics are just like, okay, we got to do that again this year. But you need to explain your rationale for why an entry is on there. And then you will get questions. At least I hope you get a lot of questions, but you'll be able to back it up because of this spreadsheet.
Okay. And then customizing. And I think this is the hardest part, especially if you're responsible. Let's say I'm the compliance officer and I'm having to do AML awareness training, but I'm having to do it to the accounting team or the finance team. And I don't know all the systems they use. I don't know all the how, what they do. So to me, this is where I think when it comes to compliance training or any kind of training, like I said, IT person having to go in and do training, Um, it can be, this to me is going to require a lot of kind of in-depth, I'm going to have to do a lot of learning so I can then teach. Would you
Maybe,
agree?
maybe. So maybe not. So one of the things that I used to do with in-person training is bring someone there for a little commentary, the technical side, because you build credibility with the audience when they recognize a face and not somebody coming in to train, for example, audit or another group. So I leverage those relationships that I build internally and get them involved. I want everybody to train. I mean, that's my goal. If you're overseeing a business area, you should learn how to train and get your messages across. So I think it's very important.
Okay. Yeah. And I am seeing a lot more, I guess it's like regulatory guidance saying that, training must be role specific or responsibility specific. So I am seeing that wording a lot, and
Yeah.
I'm trying to think to myself, I know I didn't do that back in my day, and or I kind of would do, some for lawyers, some for, admins and stuff like that. But if they were client facing or customer facing versus back office kind of thing, but it was again that kind of getting into that detail of the role specific. I did find was difficult.
You know, what's interesting is like, because of my role, I interacted with all facets of the firm. So I was able to learn a lot more on what people do day to day, which
Hmm.
helped with the training delivery and putting it together. But, having somebody there with you, embrace it, if you
Okay.
need it.
Yeah, bring them in. Fantastic.
Yeah.
And then actually developing the training program. Um, so we understood the needs.
Hmm.
Uh, and I love the fact that you say a balanced approach. So you're not saying everything has to be in person, customized.
No,
Yeah, yeah. Um, and
not
method of delivery. What's your favorite method of delivery?
As you can probably tell, I love the in-person delivery. But, everything has a place. And, typically someone will say, oh, we need learning on this, or we need a communication on this. You need to evaluate the audience. I mean, it's really easy. Let's just throw an e-learning out there. But if there are new rules or regs that need to get across, you might not want to use e-learning. You might want to use it in person because it gives the opportunity for people to ask questions, be heard, and also listen for others. So I think there's a purpose for each type of training, but you need to evaluate it differently. And of course, budget comes into play as well.
Okay. So the purpose. What about, I hear a lot of people talk about gamification of training. Um, what are your thoughts? What's your opinion on gamification?
I feel like every technology has an audience. Within financial services, like I've been looking at gamification for a while now. If it works, people like to play games and learn, it could help, but you really have to see it's conducive for your atmosphere. I know a lot
Yeah.
of banks would rather just do it the old fashioned way, while there are more technology driven organizations that might be more suitable for gamification. So it's kind of like, is it needed and does it still get the point across? So I'm like, I think basically it's based on the audience.
Okay. So yeah. Okay. So that's part of that audience analysis. Reading the room kind of
Yes.
thing. Yeah. And of course, you want people to take it seriously. So, but at the same time, too, engage them. 'Cause last thing you want people doing is tuning out, checking their social media while you're up front talking. So there is that. I thought it was interesting. I was talking to a guy. It was a year or so ago, and he's the MLRO. And we were talking about AML training, and he said
Mhm.
one of his tactics was before the training, he would ask people to come up with a plan on, and this is specifically anti money laundering, how would they launder money if they had, X amount of dollars and they had to launder that money using their firm and their products and services? How would they go about doing it? And I thought, so it made them think. And then they came to the session with, this is how I would do it, or this is how I would do it. So they kind of had a pre homework assignment, so to speak, before the training. And then it was very discussion based. And of course, I would obviously then hit on the terms. And I thought, now that's quite interesting. And I thought very interactive, and it makes them almost train themselves and think. So I really did like that idea.
I love that idea because you have to understand the mind of a fraudster, a money launderer, because it helps tremendously. If you know how they think, how they act, the greediness and everything that goes in hand, it just makes you more equipped to handle those risks, right? I think that's a good exercise, and I always implore people to understand the mental side of it because it does help with not just training, but other programs that you have in your firm.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought that was great too. All right. So this is poll question number two. And of course, and that is, what challenges would you anticipate facing? So we've kind of talked a little bit about this already. So Tom, if you don't mind launching that. For some reason, I don't see the launch, so I can't see the answers as they're coming in. Um, but yeah, budget, senior management buy-in is one option. Staff reluctance. I can remember being the compliance officer, and if I walked into a room, the person would groan, "Oh, what now?" And I was like, "Really? I'm just here
Yeah.
to say hi." Um, so also the staff reluctance too is, I think, some of the biggest challenges that some firms could face, especially if those staff are the revenue generators, because you have to
Yes.
take them out of their revenue generating mode and go and put them into a room. And I do remember one time, looking at a boardroom, I said, God, we've got 50 lawyers in here, for X number of hours. How much
Yeah.
money is the firm losing? And that's what the senior partner is also thinking. So that
Yeah.
training has to be really effective, and it has to
Yeah.
be.
It's to be effective, but that's a relationship side with the business head, right? You find out what time of the day, time of the week is the best to get everybody's attention. Like I've dealt with traders, like 8 a.m. is a typical time. Investment bankers sometimes had to do it 7, 8 o'clock at night at training. But knowing your audience and having that relationship with that business head, you'll get the buy-in and you'll find the appropriate day and time. And also, like with budget, like there are ways to do training that are absolutely free. I've done this a few times where I'll film a 2-minute segment on, in operations, talking to somebody about a problem, and I play that in the training itself. I did it on my phone. Doesn't cost anything, but you can talk about a real life scenario that happened, just recently between a couple of colleagues. So you can get creative if you don't have a budget, and there are things that just don't cost anything.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Tom. So what's our results here? What do most people think that they're going to uh,
So this one's
think?
pretty even across the board, but the biggest one is time pressure with 38%,
Yeah.
and then next is all of the above.
Oh, all of the above. Yeah, yeah. Time, staff reluctance, budget,
Yeah.
things like that. Yeah, and I do agree with you, Justin. Thank you, Tom. I appreciate that. Um,
Yeah.
I do agree with you that it is the budget could very well, like I say, you don't have to have a significant budget. I said I mentioned 18, 20 grand, but that was whenever you're contributing to, degree programs and diplomas and
Yeah.
conferences and certificates. That's where the money gets spent, and that can be quite expensive. All right, fantastic. So, and then how do we overcome those challenges?
Oh, your influence and persuasion skills are on full display now. You know,
Exactly.
it, you get the opportunity to improve those soft skills. Now you got to remember, not everybody likes compliance training like us, you know? So you have to
Fantastic.
see,
Why
like,
not?
I agree. Listen, But you have to show management why it's worth it. You can say the word mandatory or you got to attend. Not a great way to lead a conversation. I never use the word mandatory. I basically show them that we're going to do this X amount of time, and during the course of the year, you're going to accumulate 5 hours of training on different topics. They're not going to be an hour. They could be a half hour. Could even be 15 minutes before the opening bell. Just to give you an example. There's you have to look at duration. It doesn't always have to be an hour or 3 hours. It could be short and sweet as long as you get the main points across. And that's what you have to emphasize with senior management. In addition, you got to show them your progress during the course of the year. Things change, and your plan has to be flexible to take into account any rule regs, any business changes, anything like that. So I always schedule either monthly, quarterly meetings with management, depending on their involvement, and just show them what's going on. And that typically leads to buy-in, you know. But you have to have a basis for why you're talking about each topic. And that's the key. And they will understand. And also, oh, the other thing is remember, you're dealing with revenue generators. But as compliance members, you got to remember you're revenue enablers, right? That's the way you need to look at it. Like, okay, great, I'm not making any money, but I'm giving advice and alternatives to a different approach to help the business succeed. So you have to look at it that way as well.
Yes, absolutely. As well as, you know, not just enabling, but, protecting that revenue.
Yeah.
Because the last thing the firm organization wants is a fine. And, or they don't want a staff member to do something that triggers an inspection. Um, so that is, that's what I like to do. I like to say, if you do everything right, you won't even trigger an inspection. And then of course you don't get the fine. People think, oh, I just don't want to get a fine. Well, let's try and even avoid the inspection in the first place by making the regulator go. They know what they're doing. They've got it. Because a lot of these
Yeah.
plans have to be submitted um,
Mhm.
for some firms. Yeah. Same thing with that staff resentment. It's like no, we do the same thing, in our system. So, our system allows our licensees to kind of, record their own training, put it in, and we've even done, provided some training for them that will be, 15, 20 minutes long. Even our
Yeah.
silo user training that we upload, sometimes they're only 5 minutes long.
Mhm.
Because I agree with you on the micromanagement. Sometimes when people go, oh, it's an hour, I just don't have that hour. You do have 15 minutes somewhere. So,
Yes, agreed.
yeah, but then of course I do also like the hour long ones too, because that really gets the kind of you can go in depth. They can ask those questions, things like that. So that's very good. All right, and we're going to have to. Yeah, I think we're doing pretty good here on timing.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, as far as that compliance culture, because again, it's like, how do you measure the compliance culture? Well, at least training documents your compliance culture. Is kind of what has been my experience. And would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, listen, people take their compliance culture for granted. What I you typically do, and yes, I agree with the training documents. It's very easy to tell. Like if you walk into an institution, you just look around, how many people are smiling? It's called my smile test. You walk around, you look at the motivation, you look at desks, and you get a general idea about what's going on. But the documents itself, it's got to be descriptive and understandable for the masses and really understand what they need to do and how. So it's got to be descriptive. But there's so many different ways to enhance a compliance culture. you know, Remember, like relationships are the key. The better your relationships, the easier it will be to get things done and also get buy in a lot easier. And that's one of the biggest things. And it enhances a compliance culture because as a training lead, you have extensions of yourself throughout the organization spreading a message. and that could help a lot.
Yeah.
Training. Sorry, go ahead, Kim.
Well, I loved that you had that in there, that that training is an extension of the leadership with that consistent message. Because obviously, senior management, CEOs, boards, they can't be everywhere at once, especially in these larger organizations. So if they can get that message into their training consistently, then again, it kind of goes back to their peace of mind that
Mhm.
it's that people are very aware of their values, their company's values, and their goals and objectives. And I loved that
Yeah,
part.
and also, one of the things I used to do is attend team meetings, if I was invited, just to get an idea of what they're doing and, what are kind of the risks. You don't have to do this for every single group and every department, but maybe once in a while you want to attend and see what's going on. Specifically, if you have an upcoming training going on, maybe the next month or two, maybe they'll provide more information that you could feed into your presentation.
Yeah, that's a great idea. All right. All right. And then we have the last slide here, some additional tips. I love knowing your audience, and you had mentioned too about generational differences, Gen X, millennials, Gen Z, Gen Alpha. I don't know what they're all called. Um, but yeah, and you had also mentioned too about again giving some of these soft skills. I do read a lot of reports about and surveys how they're saying some of the younger generation doesn't have all the right soft skills and things like that.
Mhm.
Another one that I was just reading a few days ago too was a study of one business unit was not responding within a certain time frame, and another business unit was, and so their performance was better. So it does help just keep that consistency of what the company is expecting of staff, whether it's client facing operations, things like that. So I love that. Um, any other additional tips? Anything that you kind of really wanted to kind of hit home with us? Or any tips that you find that really work for you?
One of the things I did want to point out, like, listen, when I mentioned about a balanced program, it doesn't mean that everybody has to be internal to deliver the training. You might use external sources, third parties, but you got to remember if you do use them, remember the credibility factor. Because if, for example, they've never worked in financial services or never worked in a bank or corporate environment, it's not going to help. So just pick the speakers that actually understand the environment and what happens, because if not, they're not going to relate to the people.
And I guess the other one too is bringing in those stories of those real life
Yeah.
stories. And I'm not talking about real life stories of, yeah, we got drug cartels over there. We already know that. We all watch TV and see the movies. But it's like, hey, we had this instance just 6 months ago. This was actually a risk for us, and this is how we handled it. Or using some of those real life scenarios within your organization to help, maybe even see, would you have spotted this? Um,
Yeah.
that I think is very important because it brings it home to right here at our desk, right here at what we are doing. It's not just about the bigger issues of why AML even exists, fighting that financial crime, but is that aspect too of what my role is. I think I mentioned to you that to me, I measure good training when I get an aha moment, when I go,
Hmm.
oh, now I make sense why I'm here and why I'm told I must do it this way because you need me to do it this way so that you can then take it to that next level or do this or do that. And to me, that's very important that the staff members who you're training kind of get those aha moments or can understand their role in the organization.
Absolutely. It's also like we live in an environment, or as compliance officers, we never run out of material.
It's
You-
true.
we have probably the best, just the accumulation of enforcement actions and lessons learned. I mean, we all know about that large Canadian bank that did, that was a big
Yeah,
one.
exactly.
But we all learn and we could refer to these cases, and some of them are so interesting. They really do captivate the audience. Find those stories where they're like sitting at the edge of their seat. I mean, I've even played clips of movies.
Mhm.
There's one scene in Breaking Bad, I think they were talking about money laundering. And, I had their attention throughout because they were so interested on, based on that outcome, what do we do? So get creative. You could
Yeah.
do it.
Yeah. And it can be fun. It doesn't have to be boring. Things.
No.
It's funny because I think I mentioned this to you the other day, actually. My training, I've actually been told, can be too what's that was almost cold because I if I especially when I'm training systems, I'm like do this, do this, do this, do this, and I forget to explain the why. Why do you do this? Why do you do it?
Mm,
Um, and so I have to sometimes even stop and remember that okay, I need to kind of connect with this person I'm training or this group that I'm training, so they understand the why as well, and and also make it fun and encourage them to ask questions. We're all human. We have a tendency to like I just need to get through this and get it done so I move on to my next task. Um, but yeah, and we all learn differently. I loved this pyramid that you
yeah.
presented, and and I completely agree with that bottom one. I learn best when when I'm kind of tapped on the shoulder and said, okay, you must go teach these people. I was like, okay, I better go learn that subject
I,
real
the
fast.
funny thing is, I always look at this chart or diagram occasionally because it just gets me back to, why I'm training and what I'm trying to do. So I always refer to this. So I make sure that, I'm getting the message across and how I'm doing it. So that's why I always look at this periodically just to make sure that I'm on par.
Yeah, fantastic. All right, so that is fantastic. Thank you. Tom, do we have any questions or particular comments? I was just going to quickly look through
We
what.
do have a couple. So
Okay.
I've got one here. I have one question for Justin. How do you ensure that the compliance trainings are to point and the information are reached to the audience in the correct way? I want to know more about this as a compliance officer and MLRO.
So really, the question is how to get the message across and have all the content. You know, I first step I always do is who is the audience? You know, is it ops? Is it front office? You have to figure out like who they are, who's attending. The second one, once you figure out the audience, it's kind of like building a personality profile like the FBI. You understand, how they're going to learn. And then you marry up the topics and try to either get more granular or more high level, depending on that particular group. Doing things for like ops, IT, audit, I have to be a little bit more, I guess, technical and a little bit more granular as opposed to other audiences like front office. So you have to be conscious of that. And if you understand the audience, you could put anything in front of them and they'll get it, right? As long as you do that in the right manner.
Yeah. I was just looking at somebody's comment, and they said one of the challenges they have is there's just so much information they have to relay. And
Yeah,
yeah, I completely agree with that. I mean, so many times, even in these webinar sessions that we do here, it's like, oh, well, we could talk about that in a whole just that one little slide could be a whole separate hour long, 2 hour long presentation, and
yeah.
it's just too much. It's so much to take in. And sorry, yeah, I don't have any any advice other than you do have to break it down, and that's where those 15-minute, 20-minute, 30-minute, um, you know, kind of training can happen. Any others that you saw, Tom? Any other questions?
One just come in. Can the compliance officer select another member of his or her team to deliver training to staff within the organisation?
I would think so.
Of course. Of
Yeah.
course. I'm
If it's getting up in front of people is not everybody's cup of tea.
No, what I found in compliance over the years that, people fall into the role for various reasons. And, one of the things I've always targeted is training them on soft skills because it allows them to not just train, but be more effective in meetings, working groups, and everything. So you got to look at the soft skills element and see, I did a presentation skills class for my last company and, other kind of trainings. And that helped the compliance officers deliver the message even more effectively. So with that in mind, as long as people have the skill, knowledge, and I'm going to say passion, they could deliver the training.
Right.
Awesome.
And I think we probably have time for about one more. Do you think, Tom?
Looking at the clock. Yeah, no, I think so. I'm just trying to look through here. How do you manage the technical compliance surrounding virtual/digital assets to a jurisdiction where the regulatory framework is new to digital assets?
So with digital assets, it's still kind of new for all of us. And I guess we're really talking about crypto as part of the digital assets. You got to remember the phrase, people fear the unknown until they know the fear. Well, actually, that's my saying now. But the point is, you have to get that fear out of individuals and understand, what goes into it, the foundational elements of crypto or digital assets, and then start building the house on top of that, right? Then you talk about the different elements and then the risks. So it's the journey that you get there, but you got to set that foundation and make sure you alleviate any fears or misunderstandings, and then it's easier.
Okay. I
That's
think,
awesome.
yeah. So I think that's time. I was looking at a few good ones there, and I mean, just like some of the questions. Sorry, I don't think we have time to answer them all, but like, how do you handle the board's assessment? Um, I was just kind of thinking, and I do know sometimes board members have to have specific training themselves. So, when you're a staff member and you have to give your board training, that can be quite um, daunting, I would say, especially when they're sitting
No,
there thinking, time, time.
it's actually fun because they're usually very knowledgeable, and you're not going to give them the typical training you do to the masses, right? You're going to make it relevant and, really talk about, let them talk. And that's the big key with the board. You want to get their input and their suggestions because they have a wealth of knowledge. So you should be talking as much or even less than the individuals there and let them share the experiences. It's one of my favorite trainings to deliver.
Oh, good for you.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Fantastic. Well, Justin, thank you so much. And um, for those of you who do want to reach out to Justin, especially if you're in the fintech or money service business or small banks, there's his email there with FS Vector. I'm sure he'll be happy to assist you at any time. So I'm just trying to get to my next slide. So again, Justin, thank you. Audience, thank you so much. We have coming up three things going on. So next week I'm going to be in Cayman, so I'm very excited about that. Seeing a lot of you again. Thank you for your thumbs up and stuff like that. Yeah, I appreciate that. We are introducing a new tool from Silo called Bowtie for better beneficial ownership management. For those of you who are in Cayman and would like a chance to meet, it's going to be Tom who's going to who you're going to reach out to. And then we have our next webinar that is 7th of November. So it's just in a few weeks or a couple weeks. And this is important. It is on regulatory inspections. We are going to be focusing on Cayman, so SEMA inspections. Ian Mason of Walkers is going to be joining us, and he is an ex-regulator, so he can kind of give us some tips. So even if you are not in Cayman, please do join us because whatever we learned from his presentation, I'm sure you can apply it in any jurisdiction to kind of see what they're focusing on. And Silo users, there are so many new features and reports in Silo to help you out. And this is kind of goes back to when you probably got Silo in the first instance. I need to update your training. and let you know about these new features as well. So everything from screening worklist configurations to approval workflows and those required documents. So these are some new features that we have been rolling out this year, and it's time for you to turn them on and learn them and get them into your processes. All right, again, Justin, thank you so much. Tom, thank you very much.
Thank
And
you.
we will be getting these webinars and the silo users for all of our silo users. Uh, you will be getting some emails here in the next week to give you those links to register. And thank you again. And I'll see you guys all next time. Justin, have a great time in New York.
Thank you, Kim. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.